and welcome to the Simsbury Woman. My name is Shannon Knall, and some of you may remember me. I've been here before doing and hosting this program on Simsbury Community Television for the Simsbury Woman, and I'm just thrilled to be back. And today, our first program is exceptionally special to me because I get to welcome a new guest who has a particularly important and poignant story. And so, Lisa, I'm so glad that you are here with us today. Lisa Gray, welcome.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, I would like to speak with you just generally first. We're looking at a picture of your son here, Jordan, in the background, and you have started an organization called A Promise to Jordan.
Yes.
And this is in light of your family's struggle and his struggle with opioid addiction.
Correct.
And the tragic outcome that your family experienced.
Yes.
So I would really like to hear your story. I think, we hear so much about opioid addiction in the news, and for some of us, it's just sort of peripheral. But you're a mom in our community, just like many of us. And so it truly can happen to anyone. And so I'd just like to hear a little bit of your story.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Well, I am originally from Southern California, and I moved to Connecticut with my eldest son, Jordan, 23 years ago, and moved to Simsbury in 2000, where I've been a resident for the last 19 years. Raised all three of my sons in Simsbury. They all graduated from the Simsbury public school system. I married my husband, a Simsbury police officer, in 2009, and I am currently the executive director with the Simsbury Chamber of Commerce. And yes, as you said, I am just a parent like so many of our viewers out there today. I raised all three of my sons in this wonderful community. My son Jordan played Little League Baseball and Raiders football, and he was a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout, and he rode his bike on Simsbury streets, and he swam in the Farmington River and the Simsbury Farms pool. You know, we were just a normal Simsbury family.
And so, from that point of view, where did you begin to notice that there was an issue perhaps with addiction, or what were the, if any, that you can identify precursors to that addiction?
Yep. Well, Jordan was diagnosed at age 7 with ADHD, and he had a very serious problem with ADHD. And I've since learned that many people who suffer from ADHD do turn to drugs and alcohol to self-medicate themselves. But when Jordan was 15, Labor Day weekend when he was 15, my husband was driving home from work through an apartment complex at the end of our street, and he thought he saw Jordan hanging out with some kids there and smoking. So when Jordan arrived home, we questioned him about it, and of course he denied it. But my husband, being a police officer, performed what's called a nystagmus test on him, which is a field sobriety test that officers use to gauge whether someone is under the influence. So he performed the test on Jordan, and Jordan failed because he had been smoking marijuana.
Okay.
So that was the first time that I knew that my son had ever smoked marijuana. And I had always been very open with all three of my sons that I grew up in an addicted household. I am fortunate that I don't have the disease of addiction myself, but I grew up in a household that did. So I was very open with them about what addiction did to a family. I reminded him what it did to my mother and to our family. And he flat out told me that he would not stop smoking marijuana, that he liked the way marijuana made him feel, and he intended to keep feeling it. And I knew that we had big trouble. And this was a kid who was a wonderful kid. I mean, he never really gave me any problems. He was okay in school. He was very smart, and he was definitely capable of being an A student, but he never really applied himself. So he was pretty much an average student, C's all the time. But that was really the only problem we ever had with him. Just very well-behaved, sweet, loved the company of adults. All other adults just loved having him around, and he was just a great kid. So for him to behave that way and to stand up to me and just be so defiant was not like him, and was really alarming. And
perhaps even easily dismissible as typical teenage behavior.
Yes, yes. And as time went on, of course, the behavior got worse. His grades really started to plummet in school. It took him 5 years to graduate from Simsbury High School. I was very happy and grateful that the high school was willing to work with him, and he was able to eventually get his diploma. But the behavior changed from just the grades plummeting to, of course, when we first learned of his marijuana use, we grounded him. I took away all of his privileges, no computer, no phone, no nothing. You're not allowed to see these friends or anything. But he didn't care. He by the time he was 15, this was 2 months before his 16th birthday, so he was almost the size of a grown man at that
Right.
time. So if he wanted to leave the house, he was going to leave the house.
Right.
There was nothing that I could do to stop him. He would just push past me. And he started stealing, lying, everything he would lie about. And he stole countless dollars worth of cash and items from me and my husband and his father and his brothers. There was violence. If anyone stood in his way of doing what he wanted to do, he could get violent. I mean, it was truly a living nightmare.
It sounds exactly
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And so at that time, who did you reach out to for support? Was it local? Was it enough?
Well, I started with the school, of course, asking for help, telling them that I've noticed my son's grades are plummeting and he has been smoking marijuana. And their response to me from the school counselor at the time was basically, it's a boy thing. Wait till the end of his junior year, he'll get over it, and he'll be fine. Well, I didn't want to hear that, and
Well,
I
of course.
shouldn't have. That's not what I should have heard.
Of course.
Of course, looking back now, I did go to the town social services department, which again was of little or no help. He did, I don't remember the circumstances, but for something had happened that he was ordered by the court to attend some classes twice a week up in Enfield, which we drove him to for months at a time, and that did nothing. There were countless therapists and counselors that he went to. He did go into his first of many rehab programs at the age of 19. Most, if not all of them, he was thrown out of for not following the rules. There was a time, I remember when I called the state's 211 information line asking for help, asking for names of some rehabs that I could call to try to get him into, and their response was, well, we don't have that. You'll just have to Google drug rehabs in your area and see what you can find. Well, I could have done that myself.
Exactly.
I called you for help. That was really no help.
Exactly.
So it was really difficult to get any kind of meaningful help for him.
And now when you say that town social services were of little help, is that because they didn't know how to help, or they didn't have the correct resources? Talk a little bit about that.
I think both.
Okay.
I kind of got the impression when I was visiting at the time, and we're talking 8 or 9 years ago, things are changed now, hopefully. I got the impression that this wasn't a problem that they were typically confronted with.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's because it was a rare problem back then. I kind of think it wasn't. I mean, drug use has been a problem for a long time, but
Right.
there is so much shame that goes along
That was my next question.
with
Yes.
addiction, and many people don't want to talk about it and are reluctant to reach out for help.
Right.
So that's possibly why they weren't used to someone like me coming into the office and dealing with that type of thing.
Well, and I want to touch on that a little bit, because stigma does definitely prevent people who suffer from a number of different disorders from either seeking treatment or accessing the appropriate treatment. And I think that sort of is a natural segue into what you have done to try to shed some light and take away the stigma
Yes.
from addiction.
Yes.
And so I do want to talk about that, but tell me how you got to that point. I would like to hear a little bit and have you share a little bit about how Jordan's passing perhaps sparked something in you to help fix this and remove a stigma for other families.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll talk a little bit about the day that he passed.
Okay.
Hopefully I can get
Sure.
through it okay. But in April of 2018, he was attending a rehab program down in Stamford, Connecticut called Liberation House. It was a residential treatment program. He'd been there for a couple of months. He was doing fairly well. I would visit him 1 or 2 Saturdays a month. It was a bit of a drive for me, so I couldn't go as often as I wanted to, but I would visit him at least a couple times a month. And I really liked the person that I was seeing. I felt like my son was coming back. It wasn't this stranger that I had been living with for the last 8, almost 9 years. I was starting to see glimpses of my son again. So it was very encouraging. And he talked to me about how much better he felt and that he was really finally getting to the root of his problem and dealing with it, which, by the way, I might mention, he came to me about 2 years before he passed and told me that he had been a victim of sexual abuse at the age of 5.
Oh my.
And I never knew that until he was 22 and came to me with that information. So for so many years, he felt such shame over that, and he blamed himself, even though, for crying out loud, we know a 5-year-old cannot be at fault for something like that. But this is what happens oftentimes when someone is victimized at such a young age. They do internalize it, and they blame themselves, and he felt so much shame from it that he started self-medicating, and he finally admitted that to me and his father at the age of 22. So in this program in April of 2018, he felt like he was finally bringing that out and talking about it and dealing with it. So he unfortunately ended up getting thrown out of that program, as he had at every other one, because he was not following the rules. And he then went to a sober house in New Haven, where he was required to work in the community and pay his way and buy food and cook for himself. And it was a transitional program for him to learn how to live in the real world after coming out of rehab. And he was doing well for a while. Again, got thrown out of there for not following the rules. So he came to me in May of 2018 and asked me if he could come back home. And I said, absolutely not. You need to be in rehab or in a sober house. And he refused to go, but at the time, I was going through another very challenging time in my life. I was having a very difficult time in another area of my life. And he wore me down. And he drew on my weakness, where I couldn't tell him no anymore. And he said, well, how about if I just sleep in the minivan in the driveway of our home? And stepping back a little bit, I had let him back in our home in the beginning of June. And June 6th, he overdosed for the 13th time in the bathroom of my home. And for the 13th time, luckily, someone was there, and this time it was his little brother Adam at 18. Someone was there at the right time in the right place to save his life. So that was on June 6th. We had just celebrated 6 months of sobriety with him on May 30th. And he overdosed again on June 6th. So at that point is when I told him he could not come back to the home. He asked me if he could sleep in our minivan in the driveway. And I said, okay. I didn't want him in the house, so I didn't want to subject his brothers to that again. But he wore me down, and I agreed to that, and that, you know, it may sound harsh to people who are watching this or listening that I would want my son to sleep in the minivan in our driveway. And it sounds harsh to me now, but my thinking was that, okay, he'll stay there for 3 or 4 days, and he'll realize, what have I done? You know, my life is crap, excuse the expression. I need to get myself back into rehab or into a sober house, you know. So that was what my thinking was. If I could make it as hard for him as possible, he may realize that there's no other way.
And I would imagine, just as a mother, I would feel like, this is my son. You know, and there's always that push and pull of, how do I make this
And he and I were always very, very close. So it was very hard for me to tell him no. But, you know, I was desperate at that point, and I knew letting him back in the house was not a solution for him, and it would put the rest of us at risk as well. So he stayed in the minivan, and he ended up loving it. It was like camping out for him every night.
Okay.
And he would build a fire on our deck every night, and he just had a grand old time. So June 30th, he was working at a local restaurant at the time, and June 29th, there had been a concert here at the Performing Arts Center that I'd gone to with friends, and I came home late that evening around 11 o'clock, and he was there at my house, and I let him in, and we talked for a few minutes. We talked about his work that day, and he couldn't remember if he had asked a coworker to drive him to work the next day. He didn't have a car. He had his license taken away long ago because of accidents, but he had a bicycle. I mean, he would often ride to work, but he thought he might have asked a coworker for a ride, but couldn't remember. So I said goodnight to him, and he, as he always did, he hugged me and kissed me on the cheek and said, "I love you, Mom." He was always very affectionate and sweet that way, no matter what harsh words we might have exchanged with each other during the day. He would never let the day end without telling me that he loved me and giving me a big hug and a kiss. And we went off to bed, and the next morning, it was the weekend before the Independence Day holiday, and Independence Day was going to be on Monday and Tuesday, so I wanted to take the weekend off. I mean, take those 2 days off from work, but I needed to get some work done in the office on Saturday. So I left Saturday morning to come into my office, and his bicycle was laying in our front yard, and so I thought, oh, he must have gotten a ride to work then. So I did my work at my office. I went to the grocery store, and my phone rang from my middle son, Austin. And I, seeing Austin, I happily answered it. And I said, hello. And he said, Mom, he screamed into the phone, Mom, get home now. Jordan OD'd again, and he's purple. And so I screamed into the phone, call 911, call 911, call 911. And he said, Adam, my younger son, was already calling. And I left everything in my car in the store, and I just literally flew out of the store and raced home. And all the way home, I was just saying, it can't be. And I called Austin, and I reminded him that there was some Narcan upstairs in the bathroom. I said, run and get the Narcan, and he said, Mom, Jordan's gone. I said, no, go get the Narcan, go get the Narcan. And so I could hear him telling my other son to go get the Narcan, so I hung up the phone, and I was just saying to myself, he survived 13 times. Why would he not survive the 14th time? He's okay, don't let your mind go there. And I pulled into the driveway of our home, and I could see right away his body was laying on the front lawn. They had found him inside the minivan. He had been there all day, and my younger son had gone out there to look for a phone charging cord that Jordan had borrowed the night before, and opened up the sliding door of the minivan, and there he was. So obviously very traumatic for them as well as for me to find their brother like that. But I was also very grateful that if it had to happen, it did happen at home, and we all had an opportunity to say goodbye to him. Because it could have happened in a back alley or a deserted building somewhere or something, and I would not have had that opportunity. So I was very grateful for that. But I knew just immediately my son had a deep compassion for other people. He was deeply caring, and he wanted very much to help other people in his situation, even though he couldn't help himself. He had shared with me the last time I visited him in the rehab that he thought that when he finally felt that he was healthy, he wanted to go back to school, and he wanted to become a counselor, a drug and alcohol counselor. He wanted to help other people. So I just knew that I had to start this organization, and there were people who suggested that maybe I should wait, get through your grieving process, but. And there are times since then when I thought maybe I should have, because it's been very difficult. But I knew at the time there was no time to waste. There are people dying every day. Hundreds, thousands of people dying every month from this disease, and there was just no time to waste. If I had an opportunity to save one person, to save one family from this hell that we've endured, I knew I had to start working immediately. So that's what I did.
I thank you for sharing that, because I think the more that we learn about how ugly and how painful this level of addiction is for families, the more we remove stigma, the more communities learn to support each other and the needs of members who are struggling. So your strength is really, truly remarkable. I'm sort of on the edge of becoming a little emotional, but I thank you so much for sharing that. It's really critical.
It is. It's so important to erase the stigma, and I want people to look at me and our family and say, my God, if it could happen to her, if it could happen to them, it can happen to me, or maybe it is happening to them right now. And if she has the strength to speak out, then I can too.
Right.
Because this is a disease that does not discriminate. It's happening in every state in the United States, in every community, in every family, to parents like you and me and our viewers who did everything right raising their children. You know, it's not just a disease of a low-income community. It's not just a disease of a minority community. It's not just happening in back alleys. It's everywhere.
It is.
It's everywhere.
So tell me about A Promise to Jordan and what your organization does. And I want to touch on briefly your recognition as a Simsbury hometown hero, which had to be remarkable but somewhat bittersweet.
Yes, it was truly remarkable, especially considering we were such a young organization, less than a year in existence when I received the award in May. So it was incredibly touching, and I was deeply honored to even be nominated and then to receive the award. It meant so much to me. But really, it's an award that I share with everyone in our organization. So many people from the community have reached out and expressed their desire to help. And we have a board of 8 people who are just right alongside me in this fight, working as hard as I am to raise awareness. That's the first and foremost thing that we work toward is raising awareness, because we want people to know that this is happening in affluent communities like Simsbury, where so many people have a hard time believing that it does exist. It absolutely does. And I can tell you that I know that since 2009, we have lost 16 Simsbury residents or former residents to the disease of addiction, 16 that I know of. And that doesn't even count the number who have committed suicide, because that is the end result for so many people who deal with the disease of addiction, because they see no other way out, so they take their own life. So that doesn't even count those who have died of suicide as a result of their addiction. So, you know, it's a huge problem in every community, and so we want to raise awareness of the problem and that there are resources for help, and that you can survive addiction, that while it is a disease, and it's so important for people to understand that it is a disease, please, let's get past the point where we're thinking that these people have a choice. And I was guilty of that as well, and I was guilty of that probably right up until my son died. All of us were asking ourselves, why this otherwise smart, handsome, kind, loving, kid who had everything going for him, had every reason to succeed in life, why would you choose this certain path to destruction? Why can't you just choose the path to health and happiness? And drugs and alcohol change the brain. They biologically change the brain so that these people have no willpower, no self-control. And it's an extremely difficult disease to overcome, but it can be overcome. There is no cure, but it is treatable, and it is manageable, and they can live happy, fulfilling, successful lives. And that's a really important message that we want to get across, that there is always hope. And then, of course, the second thing that we try to work on and try to eliminate is, as we talked about, the stigma. It needs to be talked about. We lost 72,000 lives in 2017 to overdoses. Overdose is now the leading cause of death for people under 50 in the United States.
Wow.
Think about that. It's not accidents, it's not car crashes, it's not even disease, it's overdoses.
Wow.
So in January of this year, the National Safety Council announced that you and I are more likely to die of an accidental overdose than we are in a car crash.
Jeez.
And people need to understand that this is a huge problem, and if it's ever going to change, we need to talk about it, and we need to feel safe talking about it. We need
Right.
there to not be judgment.
Right.
And that's what I do. That's why I talk about it. I want people to know that I have a somewhat prominent position in my community. My husband is a police officer. He has a somewhat prominent position in our community. No one would have looked at us and ever thought for a moment that we struggled with addiction every single day of our lives in such a profound way.
And thank you again for doing that, because it takes people who have experienced what you have experienced, I think, to bring this comfortably to a place of discussion. So thank you for doing that. We are kind of running out of time, believe it or not.
All right.
But
It went fast.
It does. It always goes fast. But we will put up some information about A Promise to Jordan and how we can get in touch with you or the organization should we people need help. I guess in summary, with the couple minutes that we have left, what would you say to people in Simsbury, in the Farmington Valley, who are in those, perceived to be affluent communities? What is your message to them about recognizing symptoms of addiction and how to get help?
First of all, please watch your children, watch your grandchildren, watch your friends and neighbors' children. Let's go back to a time when a child was raised by the community, where everyone was involved. And if you see something that causes you to stop and question and think that maybe there's a child in trouble, please say something. Say something to the parent. Don't be afraid. And parents, if you're one of the parents receiving that news, let's not put up walls and let's not have the not my kid attitude. Because we're not with our children 24 hours a day, every single day, and they may be doing some things that we never would have thought and that really surprise us. And so just stop and think for a minute whether the news that you're receiving could possibly be true, and get help. Reach out to us, reach out to social services. There are many, many resources now. Thank goodness things have changed in the last 7, 8, or 9 years. We have a great website, promisetojordan.org. I invite people to go on and see what events we have coming up. We do have a Narcan and QPR training coming up later this month. I'm not sure if this is airing before September 26th, but Narcan training is so important in today's day and age. You never know when you might be in a place to save a life.
Right.
Because an overdose can happen at any time in any place.
And just quickly, as you mentioned, Narcan, in the couple seconds that we have, in partnership with community first responders, is this a training that has happened throughout the community in regard to first responders? Are they?
Oh yes, they are absolutely trained.
Okay.
This particular training is not in conjunction with them, but yes, absolutely, they are trained in that. This one we are doing through the state. There's a resource through the state where I was able to arrange the training. So.
Okay. Well, Lisa, my profound condolences for your loss. I'm moved by your spirit and your tenacity and your willingness to come out here and speak about Jordan and your struggle and your family's experience with the hope of helping others. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching The Simsbury Woman. We'll be back again with another edition next month. Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.